Hey, Simon.
Hello, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm recovering from strep throat, so that's a lot of fun dealing with the realities of the American healthcare system. But aside from that, all is well in my world.
Yeah, I mean, luckily, strep throat doesn't affect, podcast
Right?
people,
Yeah.
trying to
No.
talk for, yeah, that's
Exactly. Yeah. No. I did a lot of vocal aerobics this morning preparing for this. Doing my I'm not even gonna try it. I used to do like musical theater when I was younger. So I had like I am the very modern all that whole like of a modern major journal, whatever. I can't remember how it actually goes, but either way,
we'll save your voice.
um, yes,
We'll
yes,
save it.
yes. Or maybe we'll generate my voice with AI or something today. Who knows?
Yeah, we'll oh, that could work. Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah,
Um,
just put us out of jobs. It'll be great.
yeah. So, Simon, I don't know if I told you this, but I started taking speed reading lessons a while
Oh
back.
no,
Just there's so many books I want to read, and last night I read the Da Vinci Code in 15 minutes.
no, you
I
didn't.
know it's only 4 words, the Da Vinci Code, but it's a start.
Oh, oh.
Ba-dum-tsh. And, speaking of
He'll
the
be here all week. Yeah,
speaking of, well, little quick backstory about this that's relevant for today's episode, promise.
yeah.
So originally I was trying to find a joke about Da Vinci, and I asked ChatGPT to tell me a joke. It didn't do well, right? So
No. Was it
here
like,
was
why did
here
Da Vinci cross the road?
Well, here was the
Yeah.
prompt. I said, "Tell me a joke about what do Leonardo da Vinci and parentheses something else have in common. Choose something else and make the punchline borderline tawdry." And so here's what it came up with:
Righto.
What do Leonardo da Vinci and a passionate chef have in common? They both know
Mm.
how to handle a fine piece of meat.
I
That's
hmm,
maybe funny in spite of itself. I don't know, but
maybe. Well, have you seen on TikTok, there are those folks that go around telling people jokes that aren't jokes, like the punchline just doesn't make sense,
no.
and but people feel like the social pressure to laugh,
Oh, I would show up for
and they're
that.
like, "Oh, you get it?" And they're like, "Yeah, I get it, man." And they're like, "Explain it to me."
I'm gonna have to find
And
those.
you're like, "Why? Why are you doing this to these strangers? Leave them alone."
Well, speaking of Da Vinci, I swear there was a tie in here somehow. Speaking of Da Vinci,
Yes.
our guest today is a modern day Da Vinci. Some would even say a
Mm.
Swiss Army knife, if you will. He's played bass in a rock band. He has a master's degree in applied economics. He built a 50-person marketing agency that's still doing quite well. He wrote the book on marketing memetics, which is what we talked about the last time he was on the show. You can listen to that in episode 2. He's created online courses on LinkedIn, Udemy, and VexPower that have been taken by more than 300,000 people. And now he's written a new book, which again ties back into the earlier bad jokes. A new book called Prompt Engineering for Generative AI. So
I thought it was
he,
gonna be something about the Da Vinci
ah,
Code, but
No,
yes. No.
yes,
Oh, look, you've got
this
the
is
book
it.
there.
This
Lovely.
is it. I haven't
And
had
of
a
course,
chance.
in the O'Reilly style, there's a random armadillo on the cover.
Yes, I was going to ask who gets to choose the armadillo. Is that you, Mike, or?
oh, it's O'Reilly. They get to pick, but that's specifically a screaming Harry armadillo. They tell me so.
Ah,
Yeah, it's,
Interesting.
native
yes,
to parts
yes,
of South America. Yeah, pretty interesting choice.
yes, and has very related to AI and prompt engineering. That's also you play bass. That's awesome. I play bass, and I used
Yeah.
to
Oh, cool.
play in a pop punk band back in the day. So yeah, I started playing bass because guitar and drums were already taken, and they said
Yeah,
we need a
same
third. And I
reason.
said,
I
"Yep."
think that's why everyone starts playing bass.
Yeah, basically, not even a failed guitarist. I just didn't even attempt guitar. Went straight to bass, and then eventually segued to guitar over the years. But anyway, wonderful to have you here, Mike.
Yeah, good to be here, and yeah, second time guest, I think, right?
Yeah, first, second time
That's
guest.
right.
First, second. Yeah, sorry, first, second. Yeah. So you've done so much in your career. I know last time we talked about marketing memetics, which was a fascinating conversation. I really do recommend people to go back and listen to that one if they haven't listened to it already. And you seem to be always on sort of the cutting edge. Like everything that you touch, I feel like a year later, like maybe you get bored of it and move on to the next cool thing. But then, like eventually, that thing that you had done like 5 years ago is like all the rage now, right? Like feel like that was maybe a little bit of the case with marketing mix modeling. Like you were on that before it really started to kind of gain a lot of attention, and now you're into, of course, prompt engineering and generative AI. What catches your attention on that? I mean, other than the obvious.
Yeah. No, I seem to have this knack for discovering trends and getting in. Well, it feels late to me, but then like the whole world adopts it, and then by that point, I'm like, already on to the next thing, and I don't benefit from it. That's something that's my own problem I need to figure out.
Yeah.
But yeah, like AI, it's kind of crazy. I'm not even working full time in marketing anymore. I'm working full time on as a prompt engineer, if that has a job title. I got into it really at the same time as marketing mix modeling. Weirdly, that was like one of the bets I was making. I was doing like a day a week messing around with AI, a couple of days a week messing around with marketing mix modeling, and marketing mix modeling was just like easier to make money from, and I had to pay rent, pay the mortgage. So that was most of what I was talking about a few years ago. But I started prompt engineering like 2020, I think. Got access to GPT-3, and I was blown away by the potential. I thought this is going to be a huge thing. I showed it to my wife, who was a copywriter, comes from a journalism background, and her reaction was actually like fear. She was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
if this gets better, like, what am I going to do?" And that was such an interesting reaction for me. I just thought I need to dive into this a little bit more. So I stuck with it. It was only really when ChatGPT came out that everyone suddenly needed an AI strategy, and there started to be AI companies that had budget and funding who wanted to hire me to help optimize their prompts. So it's only more recently that I've managed to get into it full time.
Right. Yeah. And now you have, I mean, well, I saw some number, it was something like 200, it was like 199 of the Forbes top 500 companies in the world mentioned AI in their quarterly sales earnings calls. And
Yeah,
the
yeah.
ones that did,
Although
their
I
stock
would
shot up.
say, do you know what? I would say the really interesting counterpoint to that is uh, only 15%, I think, of OpenAI's revenue is from the API. So basically, all of the money being made by AI right now is in the consumer space, and like basically none of those big Fortune 500 companies that are talking about AI are actually delivering production ready applications. So that's something we can dive into. But yeah, that was a real shocker. And I feel like there's this disconnect between what people are doing day to day with AI and like what all the hype says people should focus on.
Yeah. Yeah. I know there's a lot of different ways that we could perspectives. Maybe I'll edit that part out. I feel
Yeah.
a lot of different perspectives we
Put in
could
there.
take
It's
on.
organic. Yeah.
We could take on generative AI and LLMs, and we could look at just the Chat GPTs and the Claudes, or we could look at the visual, like the Dollies and those. But I want to maybe constrain us a little bit and talk about sort of use of generative AI in analytics and marketing measurement circles, right? So like, people who are setting up web analytics or building reports or doing analysis of web analytics or marketing analytics, there's a lot of obvious ways that we can start to use and incorporate those, but I want to think about it from that perspective, because that's generally the people who are listening. So what, how prevalent do you think it is to be using generative AI in analytics teams? Like, do you see a lot of that starting to be used, or what's your sense there?
Yeah, it's interesting because generative AI models really break our concept of what a computer is or what a computer is good at, because they're bad at math. Like they actually make a lot of mistakes with, like they can't count words in a sentence, or things like that. It's a lot of the well documented failures of AI around being able to calculate stuff. So that's I think led to a lot of people not being that interested from the finance space in AI, or like less interested than they otherwise would be. But I think the really surprising outcome of these models is that they're very good at writing code. So if you are a data scientist and you're the type of person who writes code to do analysis rather than someone who's doing it in Excel, then this is a real boon, because you can pop open something like the ChatGPT code interpreter. Like you could upload a spreadsheet, CSV to that, and you can just say like, make me a nice looking chart, and it will make something for you. And actually, most of the time works. I would say it has like a lower error rate than I have when I write code. So I trust it much more than I trust my own. So yeah, that's a whole kind of deep thing we can get into. But this whole kind of concept of getting it to write code, and then running the code and kind of checking if that's accurate. I think like that's where almost all of the alpha is in the AI space for someone who's analytically minded.
Well, yeah, I'd love to tap into that process specifically, and I put this out there because I've also played around with ChatGPT and thrown a spreadsheet in there with some data, and I've asked it to create future predictions, and I know how I would have worked with a data scientist previously to go about this process, and sort of that have an average error rate and these kind of things. And when I've tried it, it's just been really inconsistent. And I don't know if it's hallucination or not, but it gives me just different predictions every time. And I wonder if I had 100 data scientists and tried 100 times, if they would have the same sort of weird
Yes.
errors, because I'm not trying it. I'm like, here's one analysis. I'm like, that's the data now. But in like, what is the process that you're following? Is it that you're having it create code for you to take the analysis somewhere else, or are you doing it inside ChatGPT, just like I don't know, an average consumer would go into ChatGPT and just say, make me a spreadsheet, or analyze a spreadsheet?
Yeah, really good question. And yes, you're actually right with your intuition there, that if you hired 100 data scientists to do the same analysis, you would get 100 different results.
Brilliant.
But and I know this because I actually did this when I was learning marketing mix modeling. The way that I would do it, and this is kind of maybe something I should admit, but I would sign a client because I had worked in the US market. I could charge more than most people in the UK are willing to charge. Or most people in the UK would think was fair to charge. So I was charging US prices, and then I was hiring like multiple marketing mix modeling experts to do the same project, and then I would look at all three of the different results that I got, and they would all disagree, because marketing mix modeling is one of those things where everyone with different experiences, like it's very heavily weighted based on the analyst experience and their understanding of that specific business, and there's a lot of artistic license in marketing mix modeling, as we've talked about, but I would then take those three different answers and then pull out like, what are the bits that I think actually make a lot of sense and they're common across the three. And then I'll put that into like the final answer, the right answer, and I did that a few times and eventually learned how to do it all myself. But yeah, I think same thing with AI. Like if you ask it even three times, you're basically getting a different response in some of the cases, because there is this non-deterministic aspect to working with AI. You might get it right 99 out of 100 times, but then 1 in 100 it completely fails. So you do tend to have to run things again, or be comfortable with an error rate, and just be checking what it's doing, because I think that's the key. Like I wouldn't recommend people who don't know how to do marketing mix models, for example, use ChatGPT and just blindly trust it. But you could run a kind of process like similar to what I did, where you run it a few times, kind of average out the differences, look at the code that it wrote, and kind of say, okay, this kind of makes sense. I'm going to extract that into a module, and then I can use that again, like next time I do this type of analysis.
Okay, sorry. This is really, I guess, even if we go like simpler than a marketing mix model, like if we're talking just about forecasting, what you're saying is, though, you would just have it write the code, extract that code, run it elsewhere. You wouldn't be relying on ChatGPT to constantly come up with an appropriate forecast. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, I would say for more advanced use cases, you tend to want to pull that out into like a Jupyter notebook. And so yeah, I would say for data cleaning, I do that almost 100% in ChatGPT now, because it is really good at just like, you just throw some data in there, you just say, change this column, or like what are some issues with this data, and so I'll do exploratory analysis. I'll ask it to make a few pretty charts.
Sure.
But yeah, if I'm doing anything slightly more serious than that, then I will quite often pull. I won't be using AI like ChatGPT to do that AI work. I'll quite often be using something like Cursor or GitHub Copilot, where you have that baked into your Jupyter notebook, and it's auto completing the stuff that you're writing. But then you could also complement that by asking specific questions of ChatGPT or Claude or whichever model you're using. So I'll kind of have these like high level approach type prompts that I'm using. I'll say like, okay, I'm trying to do this. How would you approach it? But then when I know what it is I'm doing, then quite often I'll be auto completing the functions, because I'll write out the pseudo code first and say, okay, I know I need a function in order to do a time series, or I know I need a function in order to remove seasonality. And it's just very good at, once you tell it what the function inputs and outputs are, it can auto complete the rest quite often.
See, this is where I need to step up my game, because I'm very much working in R primarily, and I can't remember specifically how to do this thing. So I go to ChatGPT and say, I have this data frame. I need to do this with this other data frame. I need to join it here and there. And how do I do that? And then it gives me the code. I copy paste, and off to the races. But yeah, I think I need to step up there and just not do the copy and paste back and forth, but yeah, use like Copilot or something like that. Are you using VS Code or?
Yeah. So I was using VS Code with Copilot for the longest time, and more recently I switched to Cursor, because it's kind of like Copilot on steroids. I think they use a fork of VS Code because they imported all my settings stuff. It's basically the same. And one of the nice things about that is you can highlight a section of code and then just chat and say like kind of what this. You can use the @ symbol. You can bring in documentation into the prompt by just saying like a common one is AI models tend to use the old version of the OpenAI API when they write a function. If you ask it to call GPT-4, it will write the old version, which is annoying. So now I just add the OpenAI documentation, and then it will correct it. And the nice thing is it gives you basically like a mini pull request. So it will show you, it'll like, mark out which lines it's deleted in red, and then the lines that it's added are in green, and you can just click accept on those. So it's a lot easier than copy and pasting back and forth, and you don't break your concentration. And I don't know about you, but when I go to a different tab, then I'm like, I wonder what's happening on Twitter,
Yeah. I mean, yes, I think we all suffer from rampant Twitterism at various hours of the day. One thing that I have always wondered about here, and you see folks go like, you've got to give the AI a persona, and then they'll perform better. You're world-renowned, award-winning data scientist that has completed analysis for the U.S. government and all these like complex things, and I want you to then figure out this problem. And for some reason, it does better now figuring it out than before, and you're like, that's a weird little cosplay element that we've now introduced.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why? What's up with that?
Yeah, so there is actually evidence that this does improve the outcomes, and the reason is you have to think about the training data, like it's the whole internet, and there's some parts of the internet that are dumber than others. Right? So if you just say write me a blog post, it will kind of write the average of blog post of like that's found on the internet, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a little better because it's also been fine-tuned to be a helpful assistant, so it'll be better than average. But we have all these subjective goals when we're writing code or when we're doing analysis, and there are different styles of writing, both code and text. And I think role prompting and like kind of giving that role play aspect to the prompt really helps a lot when you have like a subjective style or opinion on how things should be done. So you can kind of ask it to, I like one of the things I have in my prompt in ChatGPT in the custom instructions is I prefer functional programming to object oriented because the default on the internet is let's create a class for this, and I hate that. Like, I don't really think in classes. I don't think of things as objects, and I don't want to waste a lot of time thinking about like the relationships between different objects. So I just like to write a bunch of functions, and then I kind of see it as like, the data is flowing through each function. So for me, like that's not the right answer, right? Like the right answer is probably to create an object, but it's something that I prefer. So you have to steer it in that direction and say, this is just something that I like to do. Like I would need to kind of role play as a functional programmer, or I want my writing to be like Hemingway, or because I like that style. I think that's where it becomes very useful, because you're guiding it. The way I see it is you're guiding it to the right part of the internet. Like I want a sarcastic response like you get on 4chan, or I want a really academic response like you get in a in a college paper or something.
Yeah. Do you think it? So this is one of the things that I struggle with is, and you wrote an entire book on how to write better prompts, basically, right? To get better output from the LLMs and from the different generative AIs. And that's like, so I struggle with this. Maybe it's my own expectations of like, that sounds like a lot of work. Why don't I just do it myself instead of trying to, like, I'm going to spend as much time, writing the prompt as it would be to just write the thing that I'm asking it to write for me, kind of scenario. Like in certain use cases, right? Like if it's like helping me with code, that's easy. I just ask for the code, and there's not as much prompt engineering that needs to go on. But for like, help me write a description for this podcast, make it witty, include some jokes, like that kind of stuff's like, I haven't reached the point yet where I can like I have a whole like bunch of templates that I can copy and paste in for like the different types of prompts. So is that something that I'm curious, do you have like a Google Drive full of like various types of prompts that you can just like plug in and change a few words here and there? Or are you just like naturally, you just write out the prompt engineer yourself, or you write out the prompt yourself just from doing it so much?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say 90% of the time I'm not really doing any prompt engineering, because these models are good enough that they can basically understand roughly what you need. I would say the small things I do in my day-to-day prompting that come from prompt engineering are like, giving direction, kind of saying, here's the role that I want you to play, or like, here's the style that I like. I always include that in my prompts. And quite often I'll include examples of the task being done. So if it doesn't nail it on the first shot, then I'll just like, okay, what would be a good example of what I wanted to do? Like if I was asking it to, come up with witty jokes, I might paste in some jokes that I think are witty, right? And then it does a much better job straight away. Like you can get double-digit performance improvement with just one example in the prompt, and then like most people don't include any examples, so that's like a really quick win. But I would say prompt engineering is, it has the word engineering in it, right? And I would say, you only really need engineering when you're doing something more than once. If you're just trying to cross a river, you don't need, a civil engineer. You could just swim across that first time. But if you're going to be going across that river every day, then you need to build a bridge. And if you're going to build a bridge, you have to make sure it's not going to fall down. You have to kind of plan ahead and kind of think about, hey, what materials do I need to use? Like what inputs do I have? How strong does it have to be? How robust to error does this have to be? So I think like that, like I don't really call prompting prompt engineering. I think if you're going to call it prompt engineering, it has to be something that you're going to be using every day at scale. So when I have a task that, like for example, for the book, I write a bunch of social posts just manually. I don't even use AI for them, but we wanted to take every example out of the book and generate social posts for each example, and then like put them into a queue so that every day there's at least something going out for the book launch. So we worked really hard. We spent like half a day writing the prompts for writing social posts for that, and then writing the script as well to extract all the examples. So now we have like 1,500 social posts that prompt wrote.
Wow.
And so it was really worth putting the effort in And like we had ended up with a pretty good prompt that, now whenever I use a social post, I could use that. But yeah, like I wouldn't say it's worth the effort most of the time.
Interesting. No, I've never even,
Yeah.
I've never thought about it that way. I've thought about it like, oh, I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to like spend 30 minutes writing the prompt. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, only do it for the ones that you're going to be getting a lot of output from it.
Yeah,
Is it like
exactly. Yeah, I have like a presentation I do quite often. I've done a few blog posts in this vein. I call it like putting a prompt in production. And it's like showing the difference between those two things. Like, here's what you get with the naive kind of prompt where it just works off the shelf. But then if you were going to build an application, either an internal tool, or external tool, or maybe just like a template that, your team is going to use in ChatGPT, because it's something that they do every day. Like maybe it's a non-technical member of the team, and you want to be able to provide them a template, so that like every time they use AI, they're getting realistic, robust results, reliable results. Then that's when you need prompt engineering, and it's worth and it's the same trade-off that we always make with automation. Like if it's going to happen very often and it's going to save a lot of time per use, then it's worth automating. And if it's fairly infrequent and it's different every time and the rules change a lot, then you probably shouldn't automate it.
Is there some kind of like I don't know, like a GitHub for prompts, or like a prompt exchange, or a prompt marketplace, anything like that?
Yeah, do you know what? It's still kind of in its infancy, I think, as an industry. So, and I would say prompt engineers in particular are like relatively allergic to tool use, because they know how to use AI, and I don't pay for any software anymore. I just get AI to build it. Like if I need something, it's actually much quicker quite often to just ask Claude, like from Anthropic, just ask that to like build me a quick artifact, or and then I have like something I could run, like even if it's just a one-time use thing. Quite often it's quicker than like finding a tool, asking for recommendations, trying to understand what they do by reading their marketing copy on the website, signing up with my email and getting spammed, and then like having to put a credit card in quite often, and then remembering to cancel it afterwards. So yeah, like I would say prompt engineers in particular are like very heavy on the build versus buy side of the equation.
Are there have you gotten to the point where the snake is eating its tail, where you have the LLM write the prompt for you or do the prompt engineering for you?
Yeah, I already automated my way out of a job. Yeah, I have a prompt the right prompts. Yeah. Do you know what though? I would say like one of the realizations you come to once you start automating all of your work with AI is that if AI can do it, it's probably not worthwhile doing in the first place, because there's no real value in it. So you start to realize that, like I was actually going to write another book with a different publisher, and the idea was going to be like 200 prompt templates. I couldn't be bothered to write 200 prompt templates. I wrote a prompt that would write prompt templates for me, and it actually worked pretty well. And I lost all motivation to write the book, and I had canceled because I was like, well, if AI can do this, then why am I doing it? Like, what is the point? And you actually have like Anthropic has a pretty cool tool in their workbench, which is kind of like the OpenAI playground, a version of that. And you put in what you're trying to do, and it'll write a prompt for you. Or you have there's a library called DSPY, which is out of Stanford. And what they do is you just give it the task, the inputs, the outputs, and you give it some examples, and then it will go and try like 200 prompts and test them for you, and run your evaluation metric, and then it spits out at the end like, here's your optimized prompt that like worked the best.
Wow. And this may be a little on the nose. Does that inherently sort of mean that prompt engineering might not be a job? I mean, I know it is. Like, at this moment in time, it's a hot commodity. A lot of companies do this, but I don't know. There's sort of a point of maturity that we realize where we go, well, it no longer, like if the LLMs do the engineering themselves, it's now just like, I guess, fully just semantic. And if you've got a good question, then it'll do the rest for you.
Yeah, good question. And I actually don't think prompt engineering will be a job long term. Well, I think it's more of a skill, like learning how to use Excel. So like I wouldn't call myself an Excel engineer.
Sure.
I do call myself prompt engineer because it's good for business, but I wouldn't like. I don't think long term it's going to be like. I don't think 50% of jobs are going to be prompt engineers, like some people are saying. But it will be a skill that, like, especially if you're in specific jobs, you're going to need to know how to work with AI. But I think it's going to converge more on like management science. It'll be called something different probably, but once you realize that, like, hey, you can automate writing a prompt, you realize it's not really about the combination of words. It's more about system design and, like, what are the inputs that I can give the AI, and then what are the outputs that I'm expecting? Like, how do I evaluate what a good response is? And that's like 80-90% of the hard work. And that's also true when you're designing an organization of humans, right? I ran an agency at 50 people under me, and the hardest thing was, who do I need to hire? Like, what skills do they need to have? Where, like, how do I give them? Like, how do I brief them on what a good job looks like? How do I do training and give them examples of what works, what doesn't work? How do I evaluate their performance? It's all the same kind of age-old questions that come from organizational design. So I actually think as AI gets smarter, it's going to be much closer to managing a human than it is like, being an engineer.
I think I even saw Lattice this week. If you're familiar with Lattice, like the HR software, they now have announced that they'll have AI employee integration in their org charts, so you will know who in the organization is responsible for managing this AI employee called, like, Steve, or what, Steve the AI.
Yeah.
He's going to be like, oh, Steve the AI reports into Jim, so go talk to Jim about that. Like,
Yeah.
Steve's
They're
really
a little
stuff
ahead.
Yeah.
They're a little ahead. I think we're several years away from that being needed. But I mean, also, like, what does HR even mean for an AI, right? Like, they can't actually be responsible.
We're going to have to put Steve on a performance improvement plan.
Exactly.
He's not doing very well. So.
Right.
Yeah.
He didn't even show up to work today. Yeah. We think he's sleeping at the office. So sorry. I know we've we deviated away from some of the you've given a couple really interesting examples of the scenarios where brands are coming to you. One being data cleaning. But I not to ask for a laundry list, but like, what are the kinds of initiatives or tasks that you're being asked to come in to work with these companies on?
Yeah. Early on, it was a lot of copywriting. And that was, the first thing that I started working on with GPT-3, because that was like a lot of my job. I was in this unusual position where I knew how to code, but I also knew how to write and like a new business, because I run an agency. So, when I
said,
met,
he's Da Vinci. He can do it all. He's creative.
Yeah.
He's got the math.
Just have ADHD probably. So a lot of my work was actually like working with deeply technical products or founders, and then like translating what they did into like writing. I actually worked a lot on automating a lot of my own writing with AI initially. So and I think a lot of the early successes in AI, like Copy AI and Jasper, like they were all copywriting apps. And I think that's like the obvious case. I would say it's probably like maybe 40% to 50% of all AI work. I think it'd be as high as that. I have done a lot of like image generation stuff as well. I would say that that's growing, and it's becoming more of an interesting business because the AI models that generate images are pretty good now. We're just getting to the point, I think, where they're getting good enough to put into campaigns directly. So, I did some work with an agency recently where I helped them fine tune Stable Diffusion to create images in the same brand style guide as the client wanted, because just through prompting it wasn't quite getting there. But you can use a lot of the same skills to fine tune these models, because it's about defining an evaluation framework. It's about kind of collecting examples of what you want. So that sort of work I think is growing, but it's only really important to companies where they're doing image generation. And then I would say a lot of it is like data extraction as well. So taking unstructured data and then pulling the relevant pieces out. So, we worked with a law firm to extract from a term sheet, extract what clauses are in there, what clauses are missing, and therefore is it founder friendly or VC friendly. That's the sort of thing that AI really excels at. And you can get really good structured data from unstructured files. So I would say those are the three major buckets, with the copywriting being like 40% to 50%, and then data extraction being maybe a third, and then 10% for image generation and 10% other random stuff.
Interesting. So on the just on the analytics piece in particular, and I know I keep coming back to that. Well, hey, it's a Measure Up podcast. Where do you see the core use case? Is it just really the data cleaning piece, or and for what's worth, I've seen, and I don't buy into them, but I've seen like a number of platforms come out with like, we literally give you the generated insight of it, any data set will have all the interesting things, all the, not just volatility, not just anomalies, not just like we sort of have a hierarchy of these trends, and we give you the semantics, sort of like the narrative science play, right? Like the whole idea of dashboards are dying because the interpretability factor is way too high, and anyone can see anything they want in the data. If you've got a Sherpa there to tell you what to see in the data, that is of high value, and I think that there is value in that idea. But I have not seen that play out accurately or effectively. Is that an area that you do that there you see potential with, or you like there's just too much room for hallucination, and you can do the same exercise 5 times even with a great prompt and you get 10 different answers, because the reality is there's so many contextual elements that just kind of controlful.
Yeah, I would say that I've done very little like paid work in the analytics space with AI, just because I don't like, I use it a lot for analytics, but that's because like I know how to do analytics and I know a lot about AI, and I'm an early adopter. I would say it's still very early in its application. I would say like probably most data scientists you talk to have used AI, at least tried it out, right? But unless they're like a really aggressive adopter of AI, like I don't know of that many people who are buying analytics tools and see, like that use AI and getting good value from them. And I think the reason is the models that we have right now are not particularly good at reasoning. So it will give you a reason why performance is up or performance is down, but it doesn't actually know, right? And it'll be a plausible sounding reason. And by the way, this is like true of humans as well. Like I remember my first job at, maybe I shouldn't name the company, but it was in the finance space, foreign currency exchange, and I was struggling to write the commentary. I was like, they gave me this job of like writing the newsletter every week of, the dollar has risen against the yen and, all this stuff. And I was like, well, what do I write about? Because I just graduated with a master's degree in economics. And I was like, a big believer of efficient market hypothesis. And I thought like, it's all kind of priced in already. So like, what are we really telling them here? What can I really tell them that about why the market moved up and down? And this guy was like, markets move on fear and greed, so you choose one. It's like, if the yen goes up, then you just talk about how bad that's going to be for the dollar. And if the yen goes down, then talk about how great that's going to be for the yen. It's like, it doesn't really matter. Like, everyone who knows finance knows that like a lot of this stuff doesn't, unless you have secret information that like, isn't in the news, then you probably don't have any alpha. I think that's true in marketing as well. Like it's like you talk to the average media buyer, you ask them why performance went up this week or why performance went down this week, and the smart ones will make it up, and the honest ones I will say that we don't really know. It's the Facebook algorithm, and we're just doing our best here.
Yeah. So I want to kind of tag on to what Simon was asking to, and kind of say like, because I think people are going to start to use this more, more frequently. So it's not going away, right? Like people are going to be using it who aren't using it, or people who are currently using it are going to be using it more. I use it for a lot of the things that you said, like exploratory data analysis. Like was a game changer for me, because now instead of spending
Mhm.
2 hours clunkily going through the data and trying to, oh, I wonder if this is changing this way, and then I have to like go into R and like do some stuff and get it to show me what I'm looking for. I just dump it
Yeah.
into, and it's good for that. So like exploratory data analysis and data cleaning. But so like as people start to get into this, what are the things that they need to watch out for? Because there are, like you said, the more confident it can give confident, plausible sounding answers, and it could be
Mhm.
completely wrong. So like, we've all seen the funny memes that's like where ChatGPT, you can't do 2 + 2 and it gets it wrong, and you can mess with it
Yeah.
and say like, no, it's not 2, no, it's not 4, it's 5, and it's like, and it says, oh, I'm so sorry, yes, 2 + 2 is 5. So like knowing the risk of getting factually incorrect information back when you're asking like for like numbers, right? Like what are the things
Mhm.
that we need to be careful of, and then how do
Yeah.
we, what can we do to sort of counter that?
Yeah, so I would say, never ask it why something went up and down, right? Like you just ask how much it went up and down. Like it's very good at writing the code to do the analysis and showing the chart, but if the information isn't in the prompt, then it will make up a reason. And that's where you're in really dangerous territory. You have to kind of ask yourself, if you hired a person and then the only context you gave that person, you didn't do any onboarding, they didn't know anything about your company, and then you just gave them that spreadsheet and said, why did this number go up? Then would that person be able to give you a real answer? Well, the difference between working with an intern and working with ChatGPT is that ChatGPT will always give you an answer. Like it'll give you a confident answer, and it'll be confidently wrong. I think with people, we're better at expressing our uncertainty. And you ask the intern, why did it go up? And they'll just admit, like, sorry, I don't actually know. Um, you never really get that from ChatGPT. So
Yeah.
I think that's the thing you have to be worried about. Like if the answer wasn't in the prompt somewhere, like or if it can't kind of give you some reasoning as to why it made that decision, then that's when you're in dangerous territory. That said, and that kind of limits use, to be honest, in analytics, because if the answer is in the prompt, then like then you kind of knew the answer already. Right? What I would say it's pretty good at though is quite often the answer is in unstructured data. And it's very good at labeling that unstructured data, and then you can find the answer from that. So what I mean is, if you in Google Analytics and you have your annotations, or maybe your team kind of keeps track of what they change day to day in their marketing organization, or whatever it is that you're doing the analysis for, you have the numbers, you can do the analysis, you can get ChatGPT to write the code, but then you could just kind of say like, there's a spike on the 24th, like what happened on the 24th? And then you could dump in all the commentary, like all the emails people sent back and forth, all the Slack messages. And instead of you having to go and read all that stuff, it can actually do a really good job of pulling out snippets and saying, oh, it looks like someone mentioned that we went out of stock, on that day. And that's probably why there was like a real spike in errors on the website. So I think that's the sort of thing that's pretty good at sifting through all that stuff that normally would take you all day. It can do that in a few seconds, and then you can kind of sense check whether that makes sense, because you can go back and look at those specific messages it pulled out.
Oh, that's so interesting. It makes me think that like the way that I think of using ChatGPT and probably others as well is like not creative enough, but like thinking, oh, if we just give it access to everyone in the company's emails, which I know some people are going to be like, whoa, hold on there,
Yeah.
for a lot of reasons, but like just like thinking, in an ideal world, like yeah, if it had access to all of the emails in the company and you did something like, hey, did anything happen on this day? It has all these different data sources that you give it access to that it could kind of, like you said, within seconds, go through everything and see, oh, I noticed someone said this thing here in this email on that day, like that you, as a person, as an analyst, you'd never have access to that even. So
Yeah,
many
exactly.
exciting
Yeah,
things.
you can just use it to do the grunt work, right? Like if there's a ton of answers out there that, it's just too expensive to find them, because you can't go through every, customer review individually. You can't like read every blog post that's happening in your industry. So one of the like what I have done to become an early adopter is really just force myself to like try and do every single task through AI, and you start to realize like some things it's surprisingly good at. And if it fails, then I'll go and try and do it normally. But like one of the really fun things I get AI to do for me is I spend a bunch of time reading what's happening in the industry, and with AI, there's so much happening every week. I can't possibly read everything. So whenever I find an interesting article that I want to read, I just forward that to an email address which is hosted by Zapier, and then Zapier sends that link to GPT-4. And then GPT-4 summarize, it's hooked up to a web crawler, so it just searches that URL, pulls in the text, GPT-4 summarizes it, and then it emails me back the summary. And so now I can look at my email and go like, okay, do I actually want to read that or not? Like, and then I can also then keyword search it and say, okay, I'm doing something, like marketing mix modeling, for example. Like I'm trying to learn more about diminishing returns. So which of the posts that I've emailed myself in the past 2 weeks have talked about diminishing returns, and you know which ones to dig into.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Or you could have it monitor to see if if a lot of the different articles are all talking about the same thing all of a sudden. Just let me know about that.
Yeah, trend analysis is great for it. Yeah.
Fantastic.
You start to see the memes. It's just like every industry has its memes, and if you can kind of stay on top of them. I mean, that's kind of how I got into AI in the first place. Is just like I'm very online, and like I just consume a lot of content, and once I see some of the smart people who write things that I like talk about the topic, I'm like, okay, that topic is going to be like at least interesting in the next 6 months or 12 months. And that's how I got into MMMs, how I got into AI. So and with AI, you can actually do that at scale. Like you could have it read everything in your industry, right? Like you could have it watch, like AI can do image recognition now, pretty good, and they can do transcription. So I did some work for a games publisher where we watched 100 hours of Twitch streams using AI, and it could tell you like what happened in every Twitch stream. What brands did they mention? What strategies did they use in the game? What parts were they frustrated with? And that's just a data trove that like normally you'd have to spend have an intern watching 100 hours of video. It's not worth it. But it could be doing this in the background and then just alerting you when something interesting happens.
So many ways, so many, like there's not enough time to explore all of the cool things you could do with this, but
It's not. We may have to have you back as our first three-peat guest. I mean, look, there's so many areas I want to go into, especially like some of the ethical constraints here. And one of the things I think about a lot is just like, why hasn't Slack really integrated any kind of AI solution, or like a partnership with OpenAI in any capacity? Because there's so much institutional knowledge that just exists in these environments that just like dies on the vine. But anyway, sorry, Jim, were you powering up for the incremental insight?
I think so, and I think we're going to do something a little bit different for today. Normally, Mike, we do an incremental insight at the end of the podcast, ask the guest to share some useful piece of information, an article, a blog post, a podcast, a video, something that they think would be useful. If you have that, great. But I was actually going to ask if you could do a pitch for your book and tell people why they should buy your book. I'm going to tell them they should buy their book, but I want to hear from you. Like, why?
It's not about armadillos. Do not be.
Very armadillo.
Very little armadillo content in there. So I'll do both. So the book, the general pitch is, we obviously everything happens really fast in AI, and in some respects, it's a fool's errand to write a book about it because it could be out of date the day you publish, and it's in print, right? So what we decided to do was look back at what are the things that were working with GPT-3 when we first started prompt engineering, and then continued to work as the models got better. So once we got to GPT-4, there were a lot of tips and tricks and hacks that just were no longer necessary. And what we struck upon was this general theme that, there are like a handful of principles that also work, in management. Actually, like I mentioned that a couple of times. Just good principles for, managing intelligences, whether those intelligences are human or, artificial. So, the 5 principles of prompting form the basis of the book, and then everything throughout the book refers back to them. So there's hundreds of examples of how to use AI and hundreds of different prompt templates, but it always comes back to like, here's the principle specifically we used. And I mentioned a few of them: give direction, like the role playing and style kind of direction that you can give it. Providing examples is another one, but essentially it's a checklist. You can go through that, and at the end of it, your prompt will pretty much be ready for production. So that's the general idea of the book. And hopefully when GPT-5 comes out, which may actually be soon, then it will still be useful. These principles will still be useful, all the way up until the singularity. That's my that's my pitch anyway.
Awesome.
Awesome. I love it.
Yeah, and then
Sorry,
in terms of a tool, I think that or the takeaway, like I would say, I mentioned this earlier. I started using Cursor recently, and I'm not affiliated with them or anything, but I had it on my to-do list for 4 months to try it out, and I just started doing it a couple of weeks ago, and I feel like I would have had a much shorter to-do list if I had tried it out 4 months ago, because it is kind of all these things that GitHub Copilot like should have built by now. So like I feel like a real idiot for not trying it sooner. Hopefully if you read this, you can like try it out and use it. But I think it's interesting because there are some teams, like the team there, thinks that are very ahead on AI and like what the bleeding edge is, and you can kind of soak up a bit of that by seeing what they build as well. So I think it's a dual purpose for using tools like that.
Awesome. I'm going to have to go check out Cursor. We'll put a link in the show notes. But Simon, if you can't check out Cursor, what should you do?
Well, actually, I was going to say, if you are writing jokes about Leonardo da Vinci and it's giving you weird meat-centric punchlines, maybe you should say, hey, pretend that you're Rodney Dangerfield, engineer that prompt and find a way to measure up.